Today's edition of Mac Voices is supported by MacVoices Magazine, our free Flipboard magazine that brings you some of the best Mac, iPhone, and iPad productivity tips on the web. High in signal, low in noise, just like MacVoices, MacVoices Magazine includes information on how you can get more out of your Apple technology. Subscribe at macvoices.com/magazine or search for MacVoices Magazine on Flipboard. And by the MacVoices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter to stay up to date on all the MacVoices news. Subscribe from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Welcome to Mac Voices. This is the talk of the Apple community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, this time around we're going to have a little fun. We're going to try something a little new with a good friend and see how it goes. And so start paying attention now because I'd like to know what you think of it. We have some folks on the Mac jury and some frequent guests here, and whenever we have them on, it seems like we're always focusing on the topic du jour or the subject that is important at that time, and maybe we never dig in and find out about these people. So I'm working on a format where we just do 5 questions. We ask them 5 questions about their Apple tech and how they use it and some of their choices, and find out maybe a little bit more, get into their psyche, put them on the couch a little bit. So we're going to try that. So to start off with, I wanted someone that wasn't a Mac pundit, but that had tech cred and that maybe we don't know enough about. And so I couldn't think of anybody better than Neal Pann. Neal is here, and he's agreed to be our guinea pig. So welcome, Neal. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chuck. I'm really honored to be the guinea pig on this one. I appreciate it.
Well, now I want to make sure that you already know this, but the folks don't know that Neal doesn't have any idea what I'm going to ask. I have a pool of questions that are about Apple tech or his Apple tech, and the only thing, the first question, it doesn't count, and that is we're going to get Neal to tell us about what Apple products and tech that he has, and then we'll start digging in and see where it takes us. So Neal, with that, I want to change that around. I want to make sure that we talk about you and what you do in the tech space and professionally.
Sure. Well, first off, I'm an architect by profession, and for the past 7 years, I've been running my own one-person office and doing all of my drafting and correspondence and just essentially running my business off of my Mac. Not too many months ago, I did take a job with a firm, so that is kind of scaled back my use of my Mac on a daily basis. But I have 7 years of experience of trying to run my own firm off of my Mac, and it's worked out pretty well, actually.
That's great. So you don't just hang around in O'Hare just waiting for random people to say hello.
No. What Chuck is referring to is I was flying with my family, and we happened to be passing through Chicago, and made a tweet about being at the airport, and Chuck saw it, and he was like just down the hall from me. So that was a wonderful happenstance to hook up.
Yeah, once in a while, those things really do happen. It's like, hey, I'm in Chicago, and you are too, and oh, you're at the airport, and you're 2 gates away. Hello.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
It was.
And then also, too, from my overall background, I have been a Mac user since '86, I think. Yeah, since '86. One of the very first architectural offices I worked in had a 128K Mac. And we started using it to produce like window and door schedules that we would then paste onto the sheets. And I've just fell in love with how to use that. I did some basic programming in high school in the mid '80s and or early '80s. And, line 10 / I didn't get that. So as soon as I sat down and saw a Mac, and I was like, wow, these are icons. I can draw things. I'm such a visual person. I've been in love with the Mac ever since and have used one since then.
That's great. And so it brings you here to
yes.
to the couch to be psychoanalyzed. So let's talk a little bit first about the Apple tech that you own. What devices do you have?
Sure. Well, how long do we have? Actually, my current iMac that I have, and that's my daily machine, I purchased that right when I got started in my own business. And so that was in early 2009. So I have a early 2009 24-inch iMac. And that actually worked really well for me for a number of years. And then about 2 years ago, to kind of extend the life. I know, Chuck, you mentioned earlier, pre-show, about talking about why. About maybe 2.5 years ago, I actually swapped out the spinning hard drive for an SSD drive to try and extend the life of this particular machine. And it's actually been fantastic. For the most part, it's still a great daily driver, machine. And because it has a full SSD drive in it now. So I haven't upgraded, and partially I haven't upgraded, because of the cost. The government seems to keep wanting a huge chunk of money every April. That there goes my computer savings fund for the year. Using it, why I haven't upgraded mainly is because Apple really hasn't improved things that much on the iMac scene. I mean, the 5K is really the one I kind of wanted, but I've been kind of waiting for Thunderbolt 3 and a few other things. So maybe this fall.
Okay, that's fair. How about on the iOS front?
On the iOS front, I've got an iPhone 6, which I'm looking forward to upgrading to a 7, hopefully in September. The iPhone 6 will get passed down to my son, who's my old iPhone 5 died, so he's been waiting for the new one to come out so that I could upgrade. And then I've usually wait about every 2 years. So I have a 6. I didn't go with the 6S. So I'll go with the 7, although with all the rumors about the 10th anniversary iPhone coming out next year, my plan is to maybe only keep this one for a year and break that cycle of every 2 years kind of upgrading. So I'm kind of planning that for this time around. So I have that. And then last winter, actually, I purchased an iPad Pro, the 12-inch Pro. And I got the keyboard and the pencil, and that's really been a fantastic device. Actually, I've really been surprised at how well it works from a writing aspect. So not much of a big sketcher on the iPad, but I'm left-handed, and the way I write, I drag my palm across the screen when I write, and I've tried several styluses before with the previous iPads, and just the palm rejection just never worked for me because they're usually palm rejection from the bottom, not necessarily from the side. And I've tried some apps that had it on the side, and it just never worked for me. So the iPad Pro with the pencil and the keyboard has just been my mobile device, really. Since I purchased it. Going back to the Mac, I do have a MacBook, late 2008 MacBook as well, which got an SSD update, and my kids use that actually for their homework for school. So that's actually been a really great device with the SSD update to keep it current enough that they can log in and do their homework stuff on it, and it's mobile, so it sits out in the kitchen if they need it, and so that works better than trying to use the iPad for their homework. It's just some of the sites use Flash, or not. They're getting away from that, but some of these older school education sites that you have to use don't work as well on the iPad. So we have the MacBook around for that. So.
I think it's worth noting that 100% of the people in this interview are left-handed. So congratulations, because I have the same issue with dragging things across on that hand. So that's interesting. Apple Watch, Apple TV.
I do have Apple Watch. There it is, right there. And I bought it. I received it on the very first day it came out, and have not been a watch wearer for probably over 20 years, and have worn this one every day since. I mainly got it because I'm a big Apple fan. I wanted to try it out. I was a little apprehensive about wearing a watch again, though. I really didn't want to do that. I found that this one, it's been pretty good. I'm an avid runner. I run a lot, and it's been a good running watch, not a great running watch. So it doesn't do the things that I wish it would do from a runner's aspect, tracking some of the things. So I'm sticking with it for right now. I do like the health aspects of it. The heart rate monitoring is great. I think last summer I went in to see my doctor, and they were curious about my heart rate. I have a lower heart rate because I run so much, and they were concerned about that. And I was able to actually download an app and extract some of the heart rate data that was just automatically being recorded from my watch and provide that to the doctor. And that was it was like an amazing resource to have, instead of having to maybe wear a heart monitor for several days or something. It was like, oh no, I have that information. It's right here on my wrist. So that was really great. And so it was a use of the Apple Watch that I wasn't expecting to be able to use, but there it was. Apple TV, yes, I have one of those. Actually, on the shelf right up above me, I have the original sitting in a box. The one that you could cook pancakes on or something, and then I have an Apple, the 4th generation as well, in the living room, and we use that constantly. My kids, they stream things off of Netflix or the Disney Channel or several other options. YouTube. My kids are getting into YouTube. I don't understand. I've never been a big YouTube watcher, so they enjoy that, and we pretty much watch most everything through the Apple TV. So I really wish Apple could get some sort of broadcast features in there so that we don't have to have cable. But we have a cable for the more recent shows that we watch through an older TiVo. But for everything else, they watch it through the Apple TV, and the kids love it. My kids love the voice activation. My daughter always turns on the closed captioning using the voice commands. My son always turns them off.
But using the voice commands.
They use the voice commands. Yeah,
Interesting.
absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So 5 questions, and Neal made reference to this, but there's always an implied why, even though some questions might be yes or no. We have to ask follow-up why. And of course, discussion is allowed of these things. So first question.
Okay.
When you wake up in the morning, and I'm going to go with a work day, so typical work day, the alarm goes off or whatever you use to wake yourself up. What are the first 3 apps that you use every day?
Wow. The first app that I would use would be the alarm function app, or the clock on my Apple Watch, because that's the one I use for the alarm, that I turn it off. So that's not necessarily using that app, but I use it to wake me up. And
Okay.
I find that I used to have the alarm on the phone, but actually after buying the little Apple kind of the round little charger that sits on your desk, I bought one of those, and I placed my Apple Watch on it. And in software update 2, or version 2 of the Watch OS, they introduced that night mode, or nightstand mode. I forget the exact name. And that's been great, because if I wake up in the middle of the night, I can tap it and I can see very clearly what the time is. So I don't know if that necessarily qualifies, but
Sure.
But I found that I like the tone that it wakes me up to. It's easy to hit the snooze, and it's a lot easier to function with than reaching a little further over to try and hit the phone. So that's probably the first one, right? I mean, It wakes me up.
Yeah.
In a normal day, usually it's probably email, maybe text messaging that I've seen, gotten maybe over the night. I have friends, or my co-hosts from the podcast I do, which we can mention later, live across the country. So they may have been texting me from 3 hours earlier, or at least for me. So I may see that. And then I've been trying to actually pull back a little bit, but Twitter and sometimes Facebook as well. I kind of went a little more than 3 there, but those are kind of the basic apps, kind of communication apps, really. That's the way I look at them beyond the watch. So it's really just trying to stay in touch, email, messages, maybe Twitter and Facebook as well.
Interesting. Okay. I really didn't see that coming. I don't know why, but I just didn't. Okay. So second question, and this may have recently changed given the changes you've made in your career.
Sure.
What are the 1 or 2 apps that you spend the most time in during a typical day? And that can be work, that can be after work. But where do you spend, if we were able to put a timer on your Mac, where would you spend the most time in which apps?
Great question. I think for when it depends on what I'm doing during the day. A lot of my job, even when I was on my own and even now working in an office, is dealing with project management. So I may be dealing with mostly email and essentially in the Finder, right? Because I'm dealing with files a lot. And that's true in my day job for a firm. And then prior to that, running my own office. So either emailing files or printing things or doing stuff like that. So probably I would have to say mostly in the Finder, ironically enough, would probably be the first one. If I'm spending the day doing drafting, it's AutoCAD for the Mac is one application, which I also use in the office I'm working in now, which although not on the Mac, but AutoCAD for Windows. Or I'm using a program called Vectorworks. So most of my personal work that I would do would all be done in Vectorworks, which is a CAD application, CAD BIM 3D, 2D application. And that's what I use to do all of my drawings on. And then when I do some consulting for other firms that are AutoCAD based, I would spend it in AutoCAD. And then a third one, or another one that I would often use, even though it is an app actually, although you probably don't think of being in it, is Dropbox. Because pretty much all of the files for my company are all on Dropbox. And then when I would collaborate with other firms, they would share their drawing files with me through Dropbox. So again, that's kind of an offshoot of, say, the Finder. But that would be another app that I would use a lot as well. And then my calendar. I have to mention my calendar because that's really where everything stays organized, not only for me, and then either meetings that I have to go to or events like this, recording with Chuck tonight, but also too just for my family. So you mentioned some of the why. My wife and I share a family calendar. We also share calendars for our kids. I have 2 children, and they're both in elementary school. Well, actually, one of them starting middle school next week. And so they have their own calendars that we share. And so they share them. We have them shared with them, with a couple of older iPads or phones that they use, and then my wife and I. So any events school-wide or anything like that are used through those shared calendars. And that's all through just the standard Apple Calendar app. So, I mean, that's actually, if I have to think about it, those are probably the apps on a daily basis that I use the most.
Okay, 2 follow-up questions to that, because I'm really intrigued. First of all, Calendar. You're just using Calendar. You're not using any of the other calendar applications, and you're not using Google Calendar. You're doing it with the Apple Calendar.
Yeah, I stay away from Google's. I started with, what did Apple call it? iTools, right? iTools back in 2000, I think it was, when they first introduced that, or maybe it was 99. And I got my email address then, and I've just kind of stayed in the Apple sphere of dealing with email and calendar. One of the things, and maybe one of the reasons why I stay with the Apple-only calendar, to try and answer your question, is many years ago, probably back in the mid-90s, do you remember Now Software? And they had a project, Now Up to Date, I think it was called.
Yep,
that was their calendar program.
Love that.
Great program, and I know the people behind that went on and created an application now that they... I think there's some history there with the current app. But one of the reasons I shy away from that is when Now bit the dust or went away, I had so much data, so much information that was tied into that app, and there was no way to get that information out. Now, some people would probably argue that there's maybe no way I can get my information out of Apple's apps as well, although I've been pretty happy with the basic functions of Calendar that I don't feel I will have a need to anytime soon. Although you can save out the ICS files, and that has all your calendar data in it. But I felt I kind of got burned a number of years ago, where it was like I kept so much of my life in this calendar program, and when it was no longer viable in the next operating system and no longer going to be supported, that I was like, oh boy, I think I'm gonna stay away from some third-party solutions that don't necessarily offer any features that I feel are necessary, that I need, or that go beyond what I feel I need that Apple provides me with the calendar app right now.
Okay. Makes perfect sense. And I think we've all gone through that experience at one point or another where we got burned by something. And so you shy away from something else and you look for standards and some ways to make sure that you can get it out. So I get it. You mentioned, though, that a lot of what you do is project management. So, but I didn't hear you mention any project management tools like Trello or Slack or, any of. I mean, there are probably a dozen great project management tools out there. Is it more just kind of in your head and on the calendar, or is that just not an area you've explored yet?
Well, I use both of those tools actually, and some others. So for my business as an independent architect, mostly I just used the Reminders app, and I would set up essentially I would have my firm name as like a category in the Reminders app, and then I would just keep track of whatever I had to do, to-do items like, hey, in 2 days I have to have this finished or follow up with this person next week, right? So I would just do that, and I started using that over 7 years ago, mainly because there weren't a lot of solutions out there at the time that would kind of integrate my contacts, my to-dos, my calendar, and it's taken Apple even some time to get that all integrated and also syncing through iOS and macOS. So, or OS 10, I guess it's still macOS. I'm jumping the gun there a month or two. But the point is that being able to have all of that information available on any device was important. And so I kind of stayed within that universe when I was dealing with my own personal stuff. Now, when it comes to things like my podcasts that I do with two other co-hosts, one lives in DC, another one lives in Southern California. So to track our topics and what we're talking about, or friends of the show, so that we can mention them on our next episode or something like that, we actually do use Trello for that. And we got into using Trello over 4 years ago to do that. And it was a new device. I reached out to some people and, what are you doing and how do you make this work? And got some feedback, and Trello was a solution, and we've stuck with it, and it's worked fantastic. I also do some facilitating with Entree Architect, which is an architect that has a business to try and help out other small firm architects. And we use actually Slack to do communication with all of the different Academy members. So we use that tool for that. We started using it a little bit with my co-hosts and I, but we using Slack, that is, but we've ended up defaulting back to messages. We have a group message that we communicate with each other on to kind of coordinate when we're going to record, what topics we're going to talk about. And we just actually use messages for that. So we don't actually we tried using Trello, but it was like, well, we're already using this and it works fine. So why add something else to the mix when we didn't need to? But it is something that I use as well for that purpose.
Yeah, and I hear a theme here that you're taking things. You don't seem to feel any pressure to adopt the latest thing or the cool thing. You take the thing that works for you, and if it doesn't work for you, then you go and find something else or step up a little bit. But I don't hear you. I guess I think a lot of us start to feel pressure that, wow, and I'm going to pick on Slack, but Slack is the cool new thing, and I need to learn Slack. And sometimes that's just not the best way to get things done.
Well, ironically enough, Chuck, part of the reason we started to try and use Slack was because, let's discover how this works. And is this something that we should use? Because Slack has obviously some features that Messages doesn't. and there's maybe reasons to use it, more than messages. But how we were using our communication, even though we tried it, and we still have our Slack channel, but we don't really use it anymore. But we tried it. I learned how to use it, and it was like, wow, this is really great. I see lots of potential uses for it, but the way we use our communication for our podcast, it was really overkill, and we didn't really need to use it.
Perfect. Okay, third question coming up, and I'm going to go off my own script.
All right.
Because of a comment you made earlier. As a runner, I'd like to know what the Apple Watch does and doesn't do, what it does do well and what it doesn't do that you would like it to, because it sounds like you have some experience with it, with running watches, and I'm not a runner, so educate me a little bit on what, and then I guess what you could recommend about the Apple Watch as a runner and what you'd like to see improved as a runner.
Sure. I think a couple of basic things. It needs GPS. My Nike running watch that I have, and a lot of runners use Garmin watches and others from different manufacturers, but they all have GPS devices in them, or GPS chips in them, so that basically you can just put on your watch, hit go, and it tracks your run, and it does a very good job at that. The problem right now with the Apple Watch is there's no GPS in it. So if you want to really track your distance and where you're going and have a map of, and track your pace per mile and all of that, the Apple Watch does some of that, but without the GPS, you have to run with the phone on you. And that's probably the biggest thing right there. I mean, I was very interested in possibly getting like a 7 Plus. When it comes out, assuming that's what it's called, the larger phone, because I used the phone quite a bit, and I thought the larger one would be a great device to have. But the problem is, with the current watch, I have to run with my phone, and I don't want a Plus phone sitting on my arm while I'm trying to run. So, I think that's probably the biggest thing. There's some minor features like track. I think it's nice to be able to swipe to the side to check your distance, to check your pace, to check your heart rate. But my Nike watch, other than heart rate, I can see all of that information on the same screen within one glance. So I think the way the running app and the workout app is designed, I think is flawed, because I need to see my pace, my overall distance, and some other overall distance, my current pace, my overall pace. All of that information needs to be on the screen at the same time. And Apple makes me swipe like 4 times to find this information, and I got to swipe for each one. And the biggest issue, to be honest with you, is when it's wet. I can't use the damn watch. The screen doesn't work. When your hands are wet, I run all year round. So when it's raining, you're wet. Your arms are, you're completely soaked. Try and go stand out or go run in the rain for 2 hours straight, right? And you get wet. So you're not running with an umbrella. And so when your hands are wet, you can't operate the screen. So it becomes completely useless when it's wet, or when you're wet running. And even sometimes when you're sweaty. This summer, it's been very hot. So when I'm running, we try and run early in the morning, but still you sweat, you get hot, your fingers get wet, and you're trying to operate the watch, usually to pause it. And the pause and resume functions, the screen is just not responsive enough. On my Nike watch, there's a little blue button on the side. I happen to have a blue one. And you press it, it pauses it. You press it again, it starts again. And I've never had a problem. Wet, dry, sweaty, doesn't matter. With the Apple Watch, there's times when I stop it because we may have to stop at a stoplight or intersection. And so I pause it and I'm tapping it. It's like, come on, pause, damn it. And then everybody takes off and I'm like, okay, resume. And it's like not working. So I think Apple's got a long ways to go if it wants the Apple Watch to become a really functional runner's watch, because it really fails in that aspect now. So you might ask, why do I wear it when I run? Mainly because it tracks, it syncs up with the health app, and it will track my heart rate. And those are things that my other watch doesn't do. There's other watches that will do that, but I haven't. It's like I've invested in the Apple Watch. I'm not going to go out and invest in another watch that I have to wear. So I like how the Apple Watch will track my movements throughout the day, whether I'm running or whether I'm walking or sitting, standing. So there's other functions of the watch that I wouldn't get. Like I'm not going to wear my running watch all day long. I read the running watch just to run in. So this one provides me a little bit of both, but it does a kind of a poor job as being a running watch.
You just taught me a lot. I didn't think about it. I have experience with the wet fingers on the iPhone. You know, you get out of the shower and the phone's ringing, and you know, you can't
answer it.
yeah, it's frustrating, and of course, you know, some of that you can't. Unfortunately, even Apple can't get around the laws of physics. So you're kind of stuck with some of this. That there are things that a solid sheet of glass can do that mechanical buttons can't. But on the other hand, there are definitely uses for analog mechanical buttons.
But Chuck, Apple has two of them. There's two mechanical buttons on this first generation Apple Watch. Let me use one to pause my run, to start my run again if it's wet. I mean, there's ways to think about this and get around it. They have buttons. Let's use them.
Okay. Well, and I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if at the moment if apps can access those buttons.
Well, this is the workout app that I'm using. I was using Nike's. I run using the Nike Plus running app on my phone. As I kind of started that way, and I'm almost 6,000 miles in. I'm not going to switch to another one right now. So I started using that one on the Apple Watch, and that was it's a horrible experience. Just the app itself is very slow because it's, I don't know. It's the Apple Watch. I mean, hopefully watchOS 3 helps that situation. But I really feel that app developers have been really hamstrung by the watchOS 1 and 2 in making their apps work well on the watch. And so I stopped doing that. And so now when I go out on a run, I'll have my phone on my arm, but to actually start my Nike app running, I actually press the phone to make it work. I don't actually use the Nike app on the watch anymore because it just doesn't work very well. And when you're running, you don't want to be messing around with your watch.
Yeah, I mean, I know this was a 1.0 product. Now we have watchOS 2. I felt like, and I'm not pointing at Nike either because I don't have any experience with it, so it would just be based on what you said. But I think a lot of developers out there, they felt pressure to get something on the watch, or just the desire to say, "Wow, I'm on the Apple Watch," and what they delivered was not the best experience. So hopefully, as we move forward, things are going to get better.
Hopefully, the one question you didn't ask me is, what apps do you use on your watch? And quite honestly, none. What? I use the watch. I may look at complication or the activity monitor. Actually, probably the app I use most on my Apple Watch is the weather, because it always triggers when I'm just folding my arms or something. It seems to activate it when I fold my arm and happens to hit the weather complication. So the next time I look at my watch, there's the weather. It's like, that's not what I wanted. But anyway, I don't, but third-party apps, I've tried probably a half a dozen or more, and they all really stink. They don't provide function enough. So maybe in watchOS 3 that will begin to change because of the way they're changing around the interface on the watch. But right now, I basically use the standard apps on the phone, and app selection actually really stinks. So if you're trying to run and you're trying to select a little tiny app and those little circles are moving around and you're running, that just doesn't work. So I think Apple's got to really rethink the interface, and hopefully watchOS 3 is the first step in that direction.
Sounds good.
Didn't mean to hijack your question.
No. This is exactly what I'm hoping for, is discussion over things. Okay, so question number 4. I am again going to go back to some of your comments earlier about just how much you use certain things. How about email? Since that seems to be a place where you spend so much of your time, tell me about your email, your clients of choice, any email services that you use,
sure,
or enhancements that you use if you use a given program.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned enhancements. SpamSieve is the number one enhancement to. I use Apple Mail just the standard Apple Mail app. For all of my personal correspondence, I use a .Mac address that I've had since, I don't know, 2000 or 1999 when iTools first rolled out. I've been using that same email address. And but for my business address, or my business email, I do have to have a separate provider for that because I have my own domain and everything. And actually, my domain and email is all done through Hover, so hover.com. At one point, I had my domains with, oh shoot, I'm forgetting the name of the provider, but the one that everybody had a lot of issues with or complained about, I should say.
There were several.
Well, because of their advertising practices, they were very sexist in their advertising. So anyway, I moved everything over to Hover. They were, relatively inexpensive, and just it seemed like from everything that I had heard and read, and from recommendations, that they were a very reputable company, and I've had no problems with them. They've been a great email service provider and also domain name service provider as well. Their tools are very easy to use online, and then anytime I've had any trouble, I've gotten great feedback from them very quickly through their help system. So setting up domains, doing all of that, redirects and other stuff like that, it's been very, very easy to use. So I use them for my emails. We do use for our podcast. We went rather cheap, and I couldn't even tell you who the heck. I didn't actually set that one up, but one of my co-hosts took care of taking care of our emails for our podcast. So. But I've never, because I always was in the .Mac and iCloud sort of universe for my email, and it worked well enough for me that I never saw a need to go to using Google's Gmail. And I know Gmail will do many different things that Apple's basic iCloud services don't provide, but they're not anything that I've needed. And so, it kind of, as you mentioned earlier, if it works for me, I'm pretty good with that, and I've kind of stuck with it. My needs are relatively simple. I don't get tons and tons of email. I do get more spam than I ever used to, so I have SpamSieve, and I keep my mail open and running 24/7 on my Mac for that purpose, so that it basically eliminates the spam from coming to my iPhone all the time. So that's how I've dealt with that situation. It's probably not the most economic or, planet friendly, because my iMac basically stays on 24/7. But I need to give it a pat on the side here, because this thing basically has been running 24/7 for probably about 5 or 6 years. And so it's never down mainly for that reason, because SpamSieve is running 24/7 through Apple Mail.
Okay. Interesting. Again, I see patterns here. I see very pragmatic patterns with your choices, and I think it's an interesting way to look at it, because we all get seduced by, again, just like Slack, you get seduced by the latest cool app or the things people are talking about, and some of us, and I'm afraid I'm among them, I try not to, but you always think maybe this one will be just a little better than what I'm using, and sure, you want to go explore, and you end up coming back.
I tell you what's prevented that, Chuck. I have an 11 and a 9-year-old now. The requirements for my time have shifted over the years. I mean, I was much like that before I had kids, and I would probably spend more time experimenting and trying out new things. But since I've had kids and they're in school, I'm also a planning commissioner in the city I live in. I have a lot of hats in the air, or lots of plates spinning. And so the experimenting and trying out every new program that comes out, that sort of side is tapered off the last number of years, because I just don't have time. I need my things to work. And once it works, I kind of try and stick with it. But that being said, another app that I want to give a shout out to that I use quite often every morning is, oh shoot, I'm forgetting. Let me call it up real quick, just so I get the name right. Reader, a newsreader app, which is called Reader. So I use Reader. I think it's for up to version 3.0. And I do follow a number of Macintosh kind of based sites, and I use the RSS feeds through Reader to kind of just check. And I do stay up on a lot of this information that comes out. So I'll read and take a peek and say, oh, is this worth checking out? Yes, no, it's got to be really good, or I just don't have time to deal with it.
Okay. Last question. And in thinking back on the conversation, I'm a little surprised that I don't think I've heard the word uttered outside of the introduction or when we started, and that's iPad. I don't think I've heard you say too much about using your iPad, other than I believe you said you use it for writing because of the keyboard and all. So what app or apps do you spend the most time with your iPad?
There's a reason. Actually, I didn't talk about the iPad because, quite honestly, I don't use it that much. I bought an iPad 1, the very first one, because everybody had to get one. And I bought the iPad 2 because we quickly learned that in a house of 4, one iPad was not the ideal. But after that, Chuck, I didn't buy another iPad. Actually, I bought an iPad Air, the first generation, for my wife. Because she got tired of sharing the iPad 1 with the kids because the iPad 2 was mine. So I never upgraded until last fall. And to kind of maybe dive into a little the weeds for the why on that was I didn't use it that much. It would sometimes sit for many days and I wouldn't use it. I was either using my phone or I was at my computer. And I just didn't see a big use for it. And just my daily use wasn't that large. So I'm like, I'm not going to go buy an iPad 2 or 3 or 4 or an Air or Air 2. I just didn't need it. And so the reason I bought the iPad Pro was as we got to the end of 2015, we made a little money on our podcast. And so it was either pay the government or maybe go buy a new toy. So I do use the iPad to track our recordings and deal with Trello on the iPad, and some of the other apps I mentioned earlier I do use on the iPad as well for our business or for the podcast. So, but really the iPad is kind of not the main device that I pick up and use. Now, that being said, it is the device that my wife uses. So we have a very different use pattern. I have my iMac here in the office. We had an older iMac, a 2004 iMac G5 that was kind of her computer, but she needs to be much more mobile. She doesn't have time to come in here and sit at the office or in the office where I'm recording this now and check her email or deal with Facebook or anything. She doesn't have time. She needs to be mobile. So that her iPad goes with her everywhere, and it is her main computer. So ironically enough, Apple came out recently with that, the iPad as a computer app or a commercial, excuse me. And for her, that's dead on. It's absolutely true. In fact, she wants an iPad Pro with a keyboard and a pencil because that's going to be her computer for the house. And but for me, I've got my iMac here, and I find it far easier to do the things like we're doing right now, recording a Skype session off of the computer. I find it easier and faster for me to type out emails or do my regular business sitting here at my 27-inch monitor next to the 24-inch iMac. So I just find it simpler and faster and easier. That being said, I do use it. It's not like it just sits there. And in the office, or if I'm in a meeting, I will take notes on it. And that's probably my biggest use. And then marking things up. I manage a team of people in my current office, and I use it to actually mark up a calendar. We're on a deadline, and every week I'm tracking what we're doing and kind of print. And I mark it up with the pencil, kind of who's doing what, and what needs to be done by Friday, and to kind of track that, and then I print it out. So It's really, really kind of interesting. A little sidebar here is that in my office, we're all PC based, and you can't, it's like a lot of offices, you can't install anything. But ironically enough, I'm on Windows 10, and Microsoft installs OneDrive as a standard. And so it's not like that's locked out for me. So how I'm able to share files that I'm, like the notes I take and anything else on my iPad at the office, I actually have OneDrive on my iPad, and so I'll share things out to the OneDrive on there and then go to my PC and have access to it without IT getting all freaked out.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I probably shouldn't have said that because they're probably going to freak out now.
Shh, nobody tell them.
Nobody tell the office.
Nobody
IT.
tell them.
Yeah.
Neal, I'm kind of surprised. Given that you are an architect, I would have thought that somewhere in the architect's world, the iPad would have been this incredible tool. Is it just not for the functions that you serve in the architectural firm at this point, or is just you don't think the software's there yet?
A little of both. I'm not a big sketcher, and I learned old school, pencil and paper sort of method of designing. And so when I'm designing a remodel or an addition to somebody's house, I go right behind my monitor over here is my drafting table, and I'll sit and pull out my trace and I start drafting. Now that process moves relatively quickly back over to the computer. But that's kind of the way I learned and the way I'm most comfortable doing it. Sitting down at the iPad to try and design just doesn't work for me. Now, I know other people that it works really well. And I've seen people do some amazing things, where they'll take a photograph and then and then be able to have that photograph and then sketch over the top of it, just all on the iPad. I've seen people do amazing things with it, but it's just not the way I work. So I'm not saying it's not the software. Some of the software is really good. Morpholio Trace, Procreate, some of those types of apps are really well. They do a great job, but it's just not the way I work. So it's more of a personal thing for me. I just don't use it for that reason.
We're back to that whole pragmatic theme, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just because we have the technology, I mean, I love all my note taking on my iPad and my iPhone, but once in a while there's still something practical about just pulling out a tablet and scribbling things down and bouncing all over the page, with little pieces of it. So I guess we all are hindered by where we came from, and we have our patterns, and trying to adopt those new patterns is a challenge.
It is. It would have to be something where I would say, okay, I'm only going to do something this way. And then I could probably adapt and make it work. But I don't know. I sometimes just fall back on what I know and how I know how to do it, and it works for me. And so, But I do love the iPad for the things that I do use it for. And sometimes I will watch Netflix through it. And so I do have to say the larger screen has been fantastic for watching. A lot of the shows I watch, my kids can't watch. And so it's a way for me to be able to sit up at night and watch that after they've gone to bed or something, and not have it be really loud like the TV downstairs would be or something.
Right. Neal, that's 5 questions. We covered a lot of ground, and this is exactly what I'd hoped for, because we kind of bounced all over the place, and hopefully gave folks a look into a real user's world, and someone that is obviously tech savvy and successful in using the technology. But yeah, some surprising answers in there. I think I came with certain expectations of the way you might answer certain questions, and you just went off in another direction. So,
well, I was really happy to do it, and I'm glad you didn't share anything with me beforehand, because this was all just completely off the cuff. I didn't have time to study or prepare anything. So these were thoughts right off the top of my head of the things that I do and how I use it. So I really appreciate you having me on, Chuck. I enjoyed this very much.
It's fun. Well, now you're all ready to run for office. So give the folks just a quick plug on where they can find you, follow you, interact with you if they so choose.
Sure. Twitter's a great avenue. My Twitter handle is my first initial and last name, Pann. So you can really follow me and interact with me there. I mentioned several times throughout this recording that I do a podcast, which is architectural based, although we tend to talk a lot we'll talk sometimes about technology and other things as well. So it's not just strictly architecture. And that's archispeakpodcast.com. So that's ARCHISPEAK podcast.com. And then you can interact through our Twitter account from that as well. So that's ARCHISPK for Twitter as well. So those are probably the two best ways to interact with me, and I enjoy doing that. So if anybody has questions about how I'm doing things or have done things, or just want to say hi, please hit me up there.
Great. Neal, thank you so much for the time and for being a guinea pig, and we'll get you back on the Mac Jury soon.
Great, Chuck. Thank you very much.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Voices. I really would like to know what you thought of this format, because it's not quite as focused in the way that we usually structure the shows. But I also think it's very useful to find out some of how people actually use the technology. Usually we're kind of evaluating something, and this was a look at how somebody really uses it on a day-to-day basis. We'll do more of these if you think it's worth it. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes, links to subscribe, and to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, SoundCloud, the MacVoices blog, the MacVoices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter, and on MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard that helps you do more with your Apple tech. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com, bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.